So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. This begs the question about the image of God. What does it mean to be created from that being, and what does it mean to be separated from it? This is where the hero's story begins. Today we dive into this separation, the duality of man and of humankind, as we split apart these ideas and discuss the deeper meaning within ourselves. Today on Circle Theories, we continue our discussion on Joseph Campbell, the hero with 1,000 faces.
What it's gotta be this time. Yeah. The sun starts to set and the moon should rise.
So we begin this episode by talking about the image of God. And so what's interesting is Joseph Campbell suggests in this text, and he looks at the Christian text as a mythology, that we can break down some basic understandings. That God created man in his image, but then found that it didn't work on earth. And so as a result, he had to create a separation, this divide. This is where we see sex brought up in the Bible for the first time. For Jung, this is interesting. He discussed the separation of the anima and the animus, as Jung would call it. That this duality comes into being, which suggests that the image of God is actually androgynous, that it is separate from any gendering that we might give it, and that these symbols now are separated and creates the duality of humans. They are now removed, because to be of God is to have both of those forms engage with one another. In paradise, this is what exists. But we have been cut off from that vision. As we discussed last time in the dreaming unconscious, we have been removed from our primordial state. If you've not seen that episode, I suggest you go back and take a look. So this is an interesting point to take off. So now we've been removed from what it means to be a complete self, and we must go and find it. This is where the hero's journey begins. They must dive in and find this. Campbell suggests that we have to deal with a self-generated double monster, the dragon thought to be God. This is what Freud might refer to as the superego, the mediator between the various concepts. This is the ideal concept of the self. This is our most higher being. And the dragon, which he refers to as sin. As Freud, this would be repressed id. This would be the darkness that exists within us so that we may find the best versions of ourselves. We have to abandon the ego to do this. Our consciousness, our conscious awareness gets in the way of our ability to engage and connect the id with the superego. So this is an interesting point as we continue our discussion. Symbols are a way in doing this. Symbols are the definition of art, of story, of meaning, and of depth. But they are just vehicles of communication. I suggest you go back and check one of our older, yet not quite as nice videos on Rollo May as we continue to discuss what it means to be an artist and what these symbols might mean. But here we discuss that the symbol itself is a way of communicating the inner self. This is the point of the myth and the story. This is a tricky thing. St. Thomas Aquinas talks about this. Aquinas talks about when our beliefs block out the very light that they are supposed to convey. To know is to not know, as Socrates would talk about all of the time. And mistaking a vehicle for its tenure may lead to spilling not only valueless ink, but of valuable blood. Though we have to understand that these are just symbols. These are representations of our inner being and psyche. The myth is to dispel the need for such ignorance. It is to dispel our need for not knowing so that we may connect with different ideas. The individual consciousness can now be reconciled with universal will. And it is effect through the realization of the true relationship of the passing phenomena of time. That life is perishable. And all die. This is the basis of existential thought. It is in conquering this, in conquering our basic form of death, that all art, literature, myth, cult, philosophy, and other disciplines come into existence. They are about expanding the horizons of our understanding so that we can break the spheres of the cosmos, so that we may transcend all experience of form and symbols, all divinities, for a realization of the void, of the abstract, of the forms, that we may come to engage with the meanings within ourselves and with our basic primitive collective unconscious, as Jung would say. In doing so, the individual becomes a hero. They gain the boon of the gods. May calls this person the artist. The church calls them the saint. Campbell calls them the hero. Regardless of what you call them, this individual seems as if they were chosen. And that's where we pick up next week on our discussion in the video, The Chosen One. So catch you next Thursday at 5. Thanks for watching this week's video on Joseph Campbell. If you enjoyed, please hit the like button, subscribe for future content, and if you learned something today, please let us know in the comments. We'd love to discuss it with you. We'll catch you next time at Circle Stick.
Sun starts to set and the moon shall rise. You can see it in his eyes. 365. Living in this cold world, but he will survive. Now or never.